My name is Christy Busby, and you are about to listen to the next episode of my podcast called Fate, From Atheism to Enlightenment. So come on in, join me. We're going to talk about it all, from atheism to enlightenment. Alrighty, guys, here we go. Get ready, and welcome to your fate. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of Fate. How's everybody doing today? On today's show, we are talking poltergeist, ghost hunting, all things paranormal. I have John Fraser here with me today. He has a new twist on what is behind paranormal activity in general. I'm very interested to hear his perspectives. His book is called Paranormal Perspectives, One Big Box of Paranormal Tricks. John Fraser, welcome to your fate, my friend. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Christine. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you for taking the time all the way from England. I appreciate it. I actually went to school in England, University of Surrey, Guildford. That's where I was at. I don't know where you're at.
Too far.
Yep. I love.
Not too far from me. I'm based in Croydon, South London, about 20 miles down the road.
Yes, I loved it there. Let's go ahead. I read your book. I found it to be a fascinating twist on what could be behind all of the activity that has happened throughout the ages that everybody has been speaking of. Paranormal activity has always been something that has been interesting to me. So let's start with, how did you become so interested? What drew you down this path of ghost hunting and the paranormal in your life?
Probably goes back quite a few years. As a teenager, just a couple of years back, I was fascinated by horror films and so on. And then suddenly I saw a documentary in the days when they didn't have wall-to-wall ghost hunting documentaries about people that actually took the subject seriously. And I didn't realize anyone did take it seriously at first. Probably came from a slightly skeptical viewpoint. But the more I read it, the more fascinating I became. It was like one of the last big what-ifs that we had to answer. We've done the moon, and so on. We haven't done quantum physics, but we still have, throughout the world, phenomena which is quite similar and equally inexplicable. So that's probably what prompted me. And as soon as I was grown up, I decided to get into it even more.
You sure did. You have been involved in many years. In the book, you talk about all the societies that you've been involved with, all the people that have influenced you throughout your time when understanding and really investigating all of these various phenomenons that people are experiencing all over the world. It is really one of the big question marks, because there hasn't been any technological advances as far as that one thing that is able to prove such phenomenon as ghosts, as a poltergeist. It's very hard to do the scientific research to actually prove it. I know in the book you talk about that you grew up and you were an atheist at first, and then you turned into an agnostic. I am a former atheist myself. You actually in the book talk about Richard Dawkins a lot. And I used to be a fan. And not that I'm not a fan now. I still think, he has a perspective, and, not everyone is going to align with your own belief system. I still think he's an intelligent man. I just think he needs to go do a few plant medicine journeys or something, and expand his mind. But what is your current religious, non-religious, where are you at in the world of spirituality, and what your take is on that?
I don't have any conventional religion.
Okay.
I'm just going back to Richard Dawkins for a
Yes.
second. Um, uh, Undoubtedly an
Oh,
intelligent
yes.
man. I was actually, when I was at university, I was in between spending too much time in the student, I was actually doing the day philosophy course under a gentleman known as called Richard Swinburne, who Dawkins makes great mention of. Um, Swinburne's a philosopher, theologist, and obviously takes the opposing view to Dawkins. And Dawkins seems to make great mention of Swinburne in the book. And I must admit, I found his arguments were sort of very basic. In fact, I think Swinburne has kind of insinuated in his replies that Dawkins may have a habit of, if he says something and then hears a counter argument, he possibly just shouts the same thing. And I don't think Dawkins' reason I'm an agnostic is, at the end of the day, when you go into any creation theory, anything like that, you're still left with what created that? What created God? What created the thing that created God? And to actually say that a God doesn't exist, it might not be the Judeo-Christian one, it might be something else, but to actually say that a God doesn't exist kind just leaves you saying, well, the Big Bang just happened. And that strikes me as being occult. How did something happen out of nothing? If you are taking that theory, which is roughly, I believe, what Dawkins does, you are simply having your own God, this unknown thing that he's calling it the Big Bang.
Yeah.
He has no comprehension of what it was and how it happened.
Yeah.
And even if we do get a comprehension of that, we still have to work out the thing behind it that caused it. And we're trying to grapple with infinity. So whichever spiritual, scientific view you take, you are hit with the occult. And this is what I don't think Dawkins quite realizes.
I completely align and resonate with what you said. Like I said, I was an atheist my whole life. I have just stepped into my own spiritual path. And on the show, I bring in and speak to people from all types of different backgrounds and religious beliefs, whether they're spiritual or I have a gentleman coming up on the show that's a Dr. Bo Kirkwood who believes very firmly in the Bible and very firmly in intelligent design. And he's written a book about how he feels it could be nothing else but an intelligent design, which he aligns with the Bible and God and that aspect of it. I still don't believe in that Judeo-Christian representation of what God is. And I don't align completely with the Bible, even though I feel that there's teachings in there that are valuable. I certainly don't feel that the Bible was brought here to bring us together or for peace. I feel like it's turned into very much a tool of manipulation, a tool to control people, a tool to keep people in fear. And so my spiritual path is still unfolding, but I love that I can bring someone like you on that's an agnostic that has an open enough mind to say, hey, I don't know. We don't know. We may never know. I still think we're in the beginning stages of really figuring out who we are and what we are. And I think quantum mechanics is going to unfold a lot more and reveal much more about our reality. And I think it's doing that now. It's certainly not mainstream. But when you get into dark matter and, particle theory and all this crazily blow your mind kind of concepts that are arising out of quantum mechanics and what the theorists are saying, it really does like this the I don't know if you know the slit experiment or something where something only appears when you're looking at it. Anyways, there's some pretty mind-boggling stuff out there, and I just think we don't know. I do, however, believe at this point that there is a higher source energy out there that we're all swimming in. I don't think that source energy is necessarily human or has human emotions or is of man ilk, but I do think there is some sort of power out there, energy source that is available to us that we can tap into if we open our hearts, our minds. And I think a lot of it lies within. I think a lot of our power, a lot of our spirituality lies within. I don't think it's an exterior thing. But, anyways, we're not here to talk about religion so much, but I just wanted to,
Let's talk about religion a little bit,
yeah,
actually.
I,
Well, it's a fascinating
it
subject.
really is. And I love talking about it. So you're in good company, my friend. Um, Going back to the book, before we get into your new theory and before you get into expanding on the book, I do want to ask you a little bit about your prior experiences with poltergeists, with ghost hunting. And I'd love for you to tell me some of your most um, spine curling things that you were able to witness or feel or experience during your time when you were figuring out your new, figuring out what paranormal is.
The first thing I should explain to you is I'm probably about as psychic as the average brick. Um, uh, I probably come from things more of a research point of view. Um, uh, I'm also a bit of a ghost hunting romantic and like staying in particularly scary places where even if nothing happens, it kind of just hits my romantic
Mm,
side. That bit isn't scientific, but we need to have the romantic within us. We're talking about phenomena I have seen. Probably the most interesting case was at a place called RAF Cosworth obviously in England. Uh, Haunted Aircraft Museum, RAF Lincoln Bomber, supposedly haunted, the Ghost Club, of which I became a member after going through my usual initiations, reading all the books and corresponding with the president of the Ghost Club. Went on it, went on this investigation. Uh, Three things happened. First of all, the leader of the investigation, an author called Peter Underwood, thought he saw a shadowy figure of man that looked a bit like a pirate. At the same time, another member of the team felt as if they had kind of got pushed back and got an electric shock. And then when we exited the plane, we found that all the fire exits were open when we're pretty sure they hadn't been before. That's the fire exits of the museum, not of the plane.
yeah.
So three things. The only one I directly experienced was the fire exits, but three things happening at the same time I thought was pretty
Mhm.
impressive. It kind of seemed to give some kind of causality to the whole thing.
Absolutely. Now, through your years of being involved in the paranormal, do you feel like there were um most of the evidence that you would get from these investigations were of a certain kind? Like, was it mainly you would get temperature fluctuations, or would they appear, or would you hear things, or would objects move? Like, was there a certain pattern or a certain way in which you would they would present themselves that you found over the years through all your investigations, or was it just random?
Um, well, temperature fluctuations, I'm not sure that there has been some anecdotal, certainly nothing that I've terribly experienced as being standard for any paranormal event. I've been on investigations where people have possibly seen shadowy figures or what have you. But again, we have the psychological possibilities that somebody has a sense of expectation. The one that always fascinates me the most is poltergeist type activity. Best example of my very limited phenomena I've experienced is, sadly, being in the next room where I was leading an investigation at a place called Charlton House in London, old Jacobean house, which has had poltergeist activity in the past. Obvious group of about 12, so we split into 3 groups of 4. The group next door were people that did not know each other, so little possibility of collusion. Somebody had brought along a small ornamental wooden mushroom, just as a potential appurate object. According to 4 independent witnesses, the mushroom flew across the room and landed on the floor with a bang of energy far bigger than a small wooden ornamental mushroom was called. We actually heard the bang to some extent, but didn't see the phenomenon. Now, I think if you're ever going to prove the paranormal, it's got to be by what you will call poltergeist type activity, which is the previously to writing the one Big Box book. I did actually write a book on poltergeists, in which I kind of came to that conclusion. I mean, we can talk about shadowy figures that we see for 15 seconds at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's in semi-darkness, and we're never going to be quite sure. But if a stone, a wooden mushroom, if something flies across the room and it was somewhere at one point and there was somewhere else at another point, you've got what I would call a fact, a paranormal fact or fraud scenario. Either the people are making it up, faking it, or it's something absolutely inexplicable by normal science.
Now, let's start getting into what your latest theory is as far as these types of experiences. You've been doing this a long time, and what is the basis of your hypothesis for where paranormal instances are arising from? Can you go through the kind of several indications that led you down this path?
To where I was. Yeah. Well, the first thing is I'm glad you went from theory to hypothesis. Yes. Because I call the one Big Box book actually a meditation. It kind of lets the reader make up their own mind based on the journey I've been through. But what I have found, I mean, first of all, I wrote a book on poltergeists, in which it seemed quite clear that ghosts and poltergeists were almost certainly one and the same thing. In fact, in some ways, apparitions seem to be a side effect on all poltergeist energy, if indeed those apparitions aren't psychological in some way or another. And then lockdown came, and I had far too much time to think. So I started to think that if ghosts and poltergeists are one and the same thing, what are poltergeists apart from spontaneous PK? What do occultists do? They try to change things, possibly even cast spells through the power of the mind. what is that if not some kind of similar energy? And the more I went through it, and the more I read, and occasionally visited places in between lockdowns, the more of a correlation there seemed to be between all these little boxes of paranormal. I mean, if you think about it, we've got ghosts, poltergeists, black magic, white magic, spiritualism, vampires. Because vampires, having been to Transylvania 6 times, for reasons I won't go into, I can do, but it would be a slight side issue. And spoken to Romanian folklorists and what have you, it seems clear to me that vampires are actually their way of describing poltergeist phenomena. When you actually go into the real modern vampire cases, and one stage removed from Bram Stoker, they're just their way of expressing a haunting stroke poltergeist. In the same way as in England, at least, nearly all hauntings tend to be grey ladies or black monks. I mean, if you're not a grey lady or a black monk, you don't haunt anywhere. It's simply a different way of expressing the same phenomena. Very, very, very quickly, as we were talking about religion earlier, it's worth noting just on that the Catholic Church has quite a few incorruptibles as saints, people whose bodies didn't corrupt. If you go to the Orthodox Church, incorruptibles are demonic. It's one of the main theological differences between the two. So by definition, we, in a religious sense, can't have vampires. We can't discuss something as, unexplained and scary and possibly
I know the word.
I'll stick to
malevolent.
I can't get my tongue around. But we cannot talk about them as being, vampiric or incorruptible because it totally clashes with our theology. So if you go around the world, I believe in Colombia they talk about poltergeists as goblins. I've forgotten the Spanish word for it, duarte or something, I believe. And you go around the world, but nevertheless, it consists of objects flying around, sometimes of bright lights as well, which kind of leads us on to a possible UFO connection.
This I found to be interesting in your book, that you went and made that kind of direct correlation between poltergeist phenomenon and UFO phenomenon. Why don't you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are there?
Well, the first thing to say is, to your listeners, is I am not a UFO expert. So this is a broad brush theory. Most of my research has been in ghosts and poltergeists. However, I mean, two possible types of UFO phenomena. Obviously, there is a possibility that there may be life elsewhere, and that is entirely different and outside any one big box theory. But I tend to find that most UFO cases I've read about, and I haven't had to experience any myself, are very much along bright lights and very much in areas which are also renowned for either being haunted or having poltergeist activity. Particularly favourite of mine is a very mysterious place in Sussex, England, called Chanctonbury Hill, which has had numerous UFO sightings, possibly had a temple built to Mithras in Roman times on it. It was a place where Aleister Crowley used to go, the occultist, for inspiration prior to doing whatever Aleister Crowley used to do. It's a place with myths and legend that go over and real apparent sightings that go over the entire spectrum. Not only have people seen UFOs there, they have had weird panic attacks, which are quite common in poltergeist cases, even when somebody isn't experiencing anything else. There's even a case of levitation in Chanctonbury Hill, which, if we take the Enfield poltergeist case literally, is also something that occasionally may happen in poltergeist cases. It may be that there are places where there are particular types of geological energies. I would love places like Chanctonbury Hill to have a full geological survey and a full testing for electromagnetism and so on, because I think that could be very intriguing. Not one of my cases, but a colleague of mine in the SPR, Steve Parsons, actually had a case in a Welsh farmhouse where there was phenomena in a particular bedroom, quite active poltergeist phenomena, where they actually found there was dangerous levels of EMF coming from the electrics. And they actually found it was in a geological fault. So you possibly do have areas which are in some ways special, which in some ways can inspire, and if one isn't expecting it, in some ways can scare the hell out of us.
You know, when reading your book and I was listening to your explanations and the connections you were trying to make and regarding this phenomenon, I did always lean back on energy. The one thing that I have learned over the last few years of speaking with people and doing my little dance down my own path of spirituality is that we're all energy, and energy can manifest in many different ways. And what are your thoughts on that concept, that at the end of the day, from what I understand, we literally are energetic beings, and we are possibly capable to vibrate at different frequencies, which allows maybe some things to appear that would not normally appear because they are now vibrating at a frequency in which our eyes, the spectrum which we are able to see on this plane, and we're able to see visions. We're able to see things that we wouldn't see because things that would not normally vibrate within a parameter that our vision can see morph and change their vibrational rate so we can see them. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about that?
I think it's probably too early to tell what are causing these anomalies for sure. I've certainly read, a few. If you take psychedelic drugs, you start to hear colors and what have you. So certainly the way that we perceive the world is just simply the way we're hardwired in any case. I don't think either I or in my One Big Box book would actually go as far as to give a direct causality. I think it's too early for that. It might be something to do with vibrations, but all I was aiming to do was to give a correlation between different phenomena and to get somebody else to make the next step, to get us out of our individual boxes and start looking at the paranormal as being one potentially one thing, or at least a vast sway of the paranormal. I mean, as this isn't actually John Fraser in lockdown, having too much time in his hands and just coming up with a random theory either. I mean, in the 19th century, when we started investigating the paranormal, we didn't necessarily have all these compartments. I mean, for example, William Crookes, who basically invented the vacuum tube in between going ghost hunting and various other things, they kind of generalized in those days. He very much was of the mind he was looking for one particular theory. I mean, it's natural in science. I mean, I give a really amusing example sometimes. I mean, Newton had the apple fall on his head. Then he did tests with a banana, which didn't actually exist in those days, or hadn't been discovered in those days. But I mean, would he go and make a theory of apple gravity and a theory of banana gravity? Or just think these are different ways of the same force being demonstrated?
Fair.
Likewise, we maybe got ourselves into our own little boxes, possibly based on our belief systems. And all my book intends to do is to try and shake up those boxes a little bit. I don't think we're as far on to talk about whether it's vibrations based or just a hidden power in the mind or even something external. I mean, I tend to favor something within us, but I certainly wouldn't write off something external. But we're not. The idea that there's about 17 different types of things running around that do the same thing strikes me as not a good place to start. Not logically impossible, but not a good place to start. And we've kind of lost our way.
Fair enough. Why don't you go into the book about potential triggers that are present when people do experience these phenomenon, that people, whether it's their stress levels, you made the electromagnetic connection. Why don't you talk about some of the triggers that people, you also say in the book, anybody that is more likely to have a paranormal experience is also that much more aligned to have a UFO experience as well. Why don't you talk about that correlation as well while we're at it?
Well, first the UFO correlation. I mean, I simply mentioned it in one big box because as somebody who has quite a few cases passed his way, it's a standard question to ask people if they've had any previous experiences, and it's very often the case. So that is purely on the fact that, yes, everyone says 10% of people have had a intense paranormal experience, which I think is roughly where the stats go, and maybe about similar having UFO. You'll probably find about 40 or 50% have had both. Now, that's purely anecdotal, but there is certainly, based on interviews and so on, a correlation between the two. And then it gets even more fun because what triggers off paranormal type experiences? One of the main things seems to be stress. Through multiple poltergeist cases, stress is always a factor. It used to be stated that it was likely to be young children going through puberty. And that is far too much of a generalization. But anyone going through that stage knows it's a very stressful time, and a time where the mind and imagination might be overactive. Well, it gets even more interesting, though, and in some ways it's a conflict between two theories, is, of course, within the top 5 triggers of stress is moving house. So you can get to a case where you believe you are moving to a haunted house when it is possible you are in effect haunting the house through your stress. And then obviously, perhaps the most stressful thing of all is the death of a loved one, which again, you have the afterlife theory, which is a perfectly respectable theory, but you also have the theory that puts you into a state of mind where real paranormal things may start happening. I mean, separate from those two, which can be seen as either or. I mean, there's lots of cases that have arisen to the breakup of a relationship and so on. It's really a standard question which anyone in the Society for Psychical Research or any good investigator would ask.
Mm-hmm.
There is almost always some stress factor in a family or an individual that's experiencing these things.
Let me ask you this. So is what you are saying that when people get into this stressful situation and they are under anxiety, they're anxious, they're probably not in their full logical, rational minds. Are you saying that the energy that they are experiencing is causing these things? Is it completely in their mind, or is their own intention, their own state of mind, an energetic, electromagnetic signal that is inducing these paranormal things to occur?
I'm saying that the paranormal events may well be real, not just that people are getting stressed. That's what I like about poltergeist type activity, because obviously you can't imagine a book going from one side of the room to the other, especially if there's more than one person in the room. It's either, as I say, it's you can't psychologically put that easily to bed through psychology in the same way as you possibly can an apparition. So I'm saying the energies are real, and possibly the paranormal events are real as well, but the cause would therefore either be through something within us or acting as a catalyst for something outside us. Both are possible. The reason I tend to think it may come from our subconscious is that most hauntings, poltergeists, don't make any sense at all. Going back to the famous Enfield poltergeist case, which I'm sure many on your side of the Atlantic have heard of.
Just for my audience, I'll say the Enfield case, if you guys have seen The Conjuring, the movie, which is wildly popular here in the United States, it's based on a true actual haunting that occurred in England. And that is what he's talking about when he's referring to the Enfield case. But yes, most people, I think.
The film is very loosely.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Inspired by, I think.
Inspired by, yes.
Yeah. Yes. In Enfield case, very briefly. Mother of 3 children, one of which wasn't entirely well. 2 of the other children started to experience poltergeist phenomena. One of the main catalysts for that phenomena was a young lady of about 12 or 13 who became possessed apparently by an old man who used to live in the house previously. It's interesting, he did actually used to live in the house previously. That so far, so good. However, she used to speak with a gruff voice when she was being apparently possessed by this gentleman. But one of the things that this gentleman seemed to keep asking about in his deep, gruff voice was about menstruation. And you have to ask yourself why an elderly gentleman would be asking about menstruation. And you can think of plenty of reasons why a 12 or 13-year-old girl would be asking about that. So, was it the old man? Or was it some hidden power, our subconscious, and so on? Another quick example. There's a case called the Andover case, which isn't quite as famous, but was investigated by a colleague of mine called Barry Colvin, who's a very respected investigator in the Society for Psychical Research. He found there could be genuine poltergeist raps coming from the wall, or at least inexplicable, and could start communicating quite thoroughly through these raps. Catalyst being, I believe, a 13-year-old girl again. And the thing is, all the raps did was to predict next week's soccer results. And from my understanding, the 13-year-old girl had a slight interest in soccer. Now, not only that, is they didn't predict them very accurately either. So if you're dealing with an outside entity, it's not a very helpful outside entity. Could at least have got the soccer results right. So there's a number of cases like that where the communications, whilst they appear paranormal in nature, seem to be tilting on what the one of the residents of the house might have been interested in, rather than what an outside entity might be interested in. That's why I tend to go in the one big box book for something within us. But that, I say, is a meditation. It is not a conclusion.
What are your fellow colleagues, current colleagues, what are their thoughts on your take on what paranormal instances could be? What kind of feedback are you getting from people who are actually in this realm doing the work with you?
Some people agree with me. Some people are more of a spiritualist outlook on such things. Some people, not particularly people I deal with. Some investigators I know talk about portals to hell in somebody's kitchen, which I think is probably irresponsible. It may or may not be true, but it will certainly scare the living daylights out of anyone. Some people call themselves demonologists, which is a term and investigate the paranormal from that perspective, which is a term I totally disagree with. Now, don't get me wrong, I can totally respect somebody that comes from a Judeo-Christian good and evil point of view. It may or may not be correct, but by introducing yourself as a demonologist, you are answering the question before it is asked. And not only that, by knocking on the door and saying, "Hello, I'm Mr. Smith, your local demonologist," if my fear, if my stress theory is in any way correct, it will cause phenomena, which is interesting. But obviously, if you're investigating something, the goodwill and the good health of their family has to come first. So, I mean, there's a myriad of, get five parapsychologists in the room. You'll get 6 different theories and one from an invisible friend as well.
Yes. And he,
So, I mean, there is some agreement that we should be trying to rationalize this a bit because, I mean, let's face it, a lot of paranormal investigators try to be scientific. And there's, I mean, anyone that's read the philosophy of science, Thomas Kuhn, it's quite clear that it's usually one scientific theory that replaces another. After, strangely enough, anomalies, which is what we have plenty of at the moment, then you get scientists trying to fill in the gaps with more far-fetched theories of mass fraud for 50 people see the same thing and so on. And then you get a new scientific paradigm. But you don't usually get 20 new scientific paradigms.
right.
A bit ambitious.
In the book, you also talk about things like past life regressions and hypnosis, and there's a particular story that you talk about a gentleman named Don Brown and how he was a pretty was able to get into such a deep trance and be very good at reciting history of a certain what was his name in the book? Cerdric or something from Saxon? Serdic.
My good old
Yeah.
Serdic the Saxon. Don, once upon a time, I was part of a hypnosis group, and there was a very poor hypnotic subject. Surprisingly, about 10% of people are good hypnotic subjects. Surprisingly, about 10% of people have had a profound paranormal experience. I don't know if there's a correlation, but you see where I might be going with my meditation. And because I was such a bad hypnotic subject, I gradually became trained in basic hypnotic techniques and to a reasonable, competent level. So I kind of understood it from both sides. And we had some good subjects. One of the best ones was this gentleman who we're calling Don Brown. Wasn't his real name, but
nope, sure don't.
And he basically got taken into numerous past lives. And when he started coming out with facts, including his by far the best past life, which was a chap called Serdic the Saxon that lived up to the Battle of Hastings in 1066 in merry old England. He started coming out with things that he probably couldn't know, but because the group had been preempting the answers to the questions, they'd actually read up in specialist history books like King Harold, who lost the Battle of Hastings, marched under a dragon banner. That's very obscure. If many of your listeners know that, I take it back. But as far as I'm concerned, that's very obscure. Of course,
that's pretty obscure.
A couple of people involved had looked it up the week before. So there's every possibility that he was under deep trance picking up ESP.
Sort of telepathic communication in a way, is that?
Telepathic communications, yes. What made it even more interesting, he had a past life as a soldier that died in World War I prior to that. And he came out with his name, the names of his officers, and so on. None of them existed.
Well,
I mean, it's quite an easy thing to check. Yeah. Because good records were kept in World War I. None of them existed, including himself. What makes it even more interesting, and possibly a slight correlation with UFOs, is we'd sometimes experiment by taking people, nudging them a little bit into fantasy lives. I mean, we took somebody down and let them choose what they were going to be, and they lived the life of a mermaid quite happily for about an hour, looking for a golden spear and so on. And that strikes me as being quite similar to some of UFO encounters. And then the really special thing is, what Don started to do as Faraday, not as the other past lives, is he started to become an automatic artist. High-speed drawing, good quality. Some of them startlingly accurate compared with deep historical research as well. And then, of course, there's a great tradition of automatic writing in the spiritualist community as well. Rosemary Brown, I believe, by coincidence, no relation to our student named Don Brown, created the new works from, I think it was Schubert and Liszt. She's a very famous medium. She believed she was getting them from Schubert and Liszt. She had some musical training and could well have been getting them from her collective subconsciousness. Alistair Crowley, who would, on the face of it, have nothing in similar to the spiritualist Rosemary Brown. In fact, they'd probably despise each other. Claims to have got his Book of the Law through automatic writing in 2 hours by communicating with his guardian angel called Awas. They're all the same thing. I mean, they are all the same thing. Now, we can, to a certain extent, hypothesize on what that thing is, which is why I'm not going to commit to being vibrations or hidden powers of the mind or what have you. But let's at least realize that there is a very good chance we are talking about the paranormal, at least under most guises of the paranormal, as being one thing.
That's very interesting. I find this hypothesis interesting for sure. It's hard to wrap your mind around that it could be all one thing because there's so many different variations of this one thing. And it reveals itself in a myriad of ways. Let me ask you this. What do you think our subconscious minds have this type of incredible power? Like, what do you know, is it, are our subconscious minds this powerful that we could create these poltergeists, these abilities to automatic write, to go into trances and have these elaborate historical accuracies, some not, some true. Like, what can you elaborate on your thoughts on that? What the subconscious mind is?
Well, we know that about 20% of the brain does. I think it's perfectly possible. I wouldn't go that much further than that, because I'm certainly not a neurologist, and I don't think neurologists. I mean, first of all, we've got to separate the difference between brain and mind,
Yes.
if indeed there is one. And that is a very deep philosophical question. Are they one and the same? And so on.
I personally don't think so. I think the brain and the mind are completely two different things in my ever so humble opinion.
It's a perfectly valid opinion. The brain could be a transmitter, and the mind could be the television programs that come through in the transmitter to give it the most basic thing. And that the mind is something etherical. But we are way too early to prove that one way or the other, because at the moment we're all running around in our own little boxes trying to prove demonology or a particular form of occultism or a particular form of fundamental religion or and so on. So the book is modest in its aims, sometimes quite humorous in its approach, and is what the One Big Box book the title's far too long. Paranormal Perspectives, one big box of paranormal tricks, from ghosts to poltergeists to the theory of one paranormal part. So let's call it one big box from now on. Yes, I had to get ghosts and poltergeists in because that's all I've ever written about in the past, and wanted something to hang it on. But the one big box thing is simply to get people to start to look at the paranormal in a more holistic way. I'm not even trying to pin down a theory for sure. There are theories I favour, because doing it at this stage would be belief-led, in the same way I disapprove of people that approach a subject from everyone's got their own beliefs, but to approach a subject just based on your own beliefs would be
Not very scientific.
not very scientific. Who would not like it?
No, not very scientific. But what I do like is that the more people out there that are asking questions, that are posing these alternative theories, at least we're having discussions about things that have been out there in our culture, in our ether for decades, that have not been taken seriously for the most part, and have not been thoroughly addressed by the scientific community. They're not.
And just sorry to interrupt. The thing is, it used to be up until maybe about the 1920s or what have you. I mean, Nobel Prize winners used to be very interested in the paranormal. Charles Richer, to name one. I mentioned William Crookes earlier. Oliver Lodge invented radio in between investigating the paranormal. And I think some of these were also members of the Golden Dawn, an occultist society. We used to think of the paranormal as being one step beyond science, but somewhere down the line, science dropped it.
Yes.
And as just pretends there isn't phenomena that isn't easily explained.
It's true. The mainstream scientific community does not seem like they take this type of things, these types of things seriously, and kind of almost it's not made fun of, but not taken seriously, not something it is beneath the scientific community interest. Like that's not something that's not what we do here. Is basically, it feels like that's the theme,
So,
bit
like Richard Dawkins.
Yep, good old Richard Dawkins. Who he is a brilliant man. He's just, everybody has their own belief system, as you said, and you just have to be open-minded. And I love that you're out there posing these questions, putting these theories out there. I think that we should be talking about this stuff more. I think that there is a big wave of people coming up that are starting to be more interested in what exactly the paranormal is. What do we have UFOs? Are we alone? What is the nature of our reality? These are all questions that I like to ask on the podcast. These are all questions that I'm here talking to people about. I love that you're agnostic and you are in the open-minded and entertaining all things that make sense and resonate with you. There's many people. I was an atheist for most of my life. I wouldn't even have categorized myself as agnostic, but I find that to be also pretty arrogant in a way, to just feel like you have all of the answers and that you wouldn't even entertain the thought of anything outside of what your own silly belief system is. And now that I've moved into my own path of spirituality and opening the door to investigate what that is and what resonates with me, I think that this is something that I would love to hear more of. I'm open to it. I'm open to all forms of beliefs, and I'm trying to figure out my own belief system. So on that,
So,
you know, that's all you can do is be as we're moving through life. I think you always have to be open-minded and understand that there's no end to the learning, there's no end to curiosity, and I think we need to start having more discussions and listening to other theories about what potentially could be causing all of this stuff that nobody seems to understand or have a real concrete explanation for. It's fascinating to me.
I couldn't agree with you more,
You
Christy.
know, it's fascinating. So let's keep asking the questions and having the dialogue and be open and minded enough to listen to somebody else's perspective. I think that's what it's all about on this journey here.
On this, we are in total agreement. Oh,
Well,
seriously.
I,
I mean, half the fun is
it
discovering,
is.
suddenly that moment when you kind of make connections between things, I think, maybe, at least. And that's the book. Box is actually, well, it's certainly not a scientific thesis. It is meant to be very readable. I think I probably even poke fun at myself occasionally. Because let's face it, everybody that everybody that investigates the unknown has to be different in a nice sort of way. So I hope I I hope that comes over as well for anyone that buys it.
I think it will. I read the book. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a new perspective on something that I have always been interested in, still am, still out there trying to and not investigate it, but I am open to hearing all aspects of information that'll illuminate us to what are we doing here? Who are we? What's the nature of reality? What is this phenomenon that all of us have been experiencing or hearing about throughout the ages that we've never really had a quite an understanding of? And and on that note, I mean, I would like to thank you, John Fraser, for coming on the show and talking to me today. And I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you,
It was
Christy.
a pleasure. I come on in if you ever have another book that you're out there that you or another theory or you've learned more information, you always have a home here on this podcast to tell me what your latest and greatest is. I would love to hear it.
I think I know what my fate might be in the
Okay,
future then.
perfect. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap on this episode of Fate from Atheism to Enlightenment. I'd like to thank John Fraser for coming on and speaking with me today. Pick up his book, Paranormal Perspectives, One Big Box of Paranormal Tricks. It'll turn your head on what you think poltergeist and UFO phenomenon is. It's a great read. And I will put in the show notes the Amazon link to your book and the O Books link to your book. And I encourage you guys to pick it up. We'll see you next week, guys. Journey well, everybody. Take care. And that is a wrap, ladies and gentlemen, on this episode of Fate from Atheism to Enlightenment. I hope you enjoyed that one. It was interesting take on what paranormal phenomenon could be. Um, I don't know. I'm curious as to what your thoughts were on that episode. He's coming from a different belief system than I am, which I love. I love talking to people that don't believe like I do. I am open to it. I want to be and stay as curious as possible here and listen to other people's perspectives and never be one to shut anything down. At the same time, I did struggle with his hypothesis. Um, I do think it's a little bit more complicated than everything of that ilk being in one big box of paranormal tricks. I do think there's much more to learn about our existence. And I think even John would possibly agree with that. I think he is posing a question and wanting other people's to start wanting other people to just start maybe even thinking about UFO stuff, paranormal stuff. He goes in the book about even quantum healing, hypnosis. It's an interesting read with a different perspective that I'd never heard before. Which I enjoy, honestly. But at the end of the day, like I said, I would like to think that we are in a much more complicated universe. I think the subconscious mind is very powerful, and I think our minds are very powerful in general, and we certainly don't know the full capacity or use our full capacity, and I think everybody can agree there. I'm just not 100% sold, John, on that particular theory, but I'm coming from atheism to stepping into spirituality, and everybody gets pulled in their own direction based on their internal knowing, their gut, um, and what resonates with me doesn't necessarily resonate with John. I'd also be interested, you know, I love an agnostic because at least they're open to the possibility of a higher power of a God. They basically are like, I'm on the fence. I don't know, which is a better position to be in because you would be more open-minded to alternate theories. I was not in that camp. However, oddly enough, I always was intrigued by the paranormal. I don't think I ever really thought much. For me, there was no overlap between religion and paranormal activity or ghosts. Like I grew up love to this day, my favorite holiday is Halloween. I love being scared. I love going to haunted houses. I love all of that. I was a big, huge Stephen King fan growing up. I read all of his stuff. I was always into ghosts and paranormal and being scared always. But I never thought much past of it as far as the religious side of it. And if you believe that there's ghosts, I, you kind of have to little bit believe there's some sort of afterlife, which I did not believe. So, it's not something I put a lot of effort and logically, critically thinking about when I was younger. But now that I am in this position where I have left atheism behind and I now look at myself as a much more deeply spiritual person, my thoughts on the paranormal are not that it is a direct reflection of our subconscious mind. I do think that there's just too much that we don't know yet about our full capacities, the full nature of reality, where we came from to really make any determination, especially today on this show. But I'm I'm going to keep talking to people and I'm going to start absolutely opening to other ways of thought. I think that there's room for all opinions, discussions, and I encourage you to pick up the book. It's a good read. It it goes in to a lot of his background in ghost hunting and investigating poltergeists. He's been doing it a long time and it's clearly a passion for him. So if anybody has the latest theory to come out with, I think he is the perfect person to do so. He's got a deep well of knowledge when it comes to that type of phenomenon. So I wish him well. If he wants to come back on the show and talk about it, his next theory, let's do it, John. I'm all for it. I'm going to leave it there. If you're liking what I'm doing here and you're listening to the show, do me a favor. Like, share, tell a friend. Do something. I would love to get as many people on board with me as possible. So I need your help to do it. And I appreciate all of your support. I hope you continue to journey with me. There's many more guests coming up. I've got some good shows coming up. I hope you stick with me. I can be reached on Instagram at F.A.T.E podcast. Alrighty, guys. I will see you on the next episode of Fate from Atheism to Enlightenment. And until then, welcome to your Fate gang. Journey well. Bye.